Okay. Since these guys are wanting the intro. Okay, so welcome everyone. For those of you who just met us or just got called, got an email from us, we are the LaRouche Political Movement and Schiller Institute, International Schiller Institute. We are here today, gathered with you. First of all, my name is Keisha. Our speakers today are going to be Megan Beats and Brian Lance. And we are here because we are at a turning point in the world right now in terms of the direction our world and our country is going in. And we want to discuss with you what you can be doing to help us to move the country in the right direction of support for President Trump, as we need to bring this country into the new paradigm of getting the United States on board economic development. And we're going to see what has been happening around the world in that regard by our speakers today. One of the main things I want you to know about and pay attention to as a key subject of our discussion today is that, and Megan Beats has been an author of one of the articles in the Hamiltonian. This is a newsletter that we put out on a weekly basis. We just actually started to back up a few weeks ago, and one of the things that you should know about is our fight around supporting the president's call for a public debate on science, on real science, versus this new Green Deal, no deal green agenda, which is, let's just be frank and blunt about it. It's a suicide pact. It is a genocidal policy. It's not going to help anyone. And this is part of the whole operation against progress in our country and against the president. But this is something that we've been strongly working on in our organization around the question of economic development and around scientific progress. So, and this has been a major aspect of the lifelong fight of economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche. And we'll talk more about Mr. LaRouche's work and our international work. One thing you should know, for those of you who are new, political statesman and economist Lyndon LaRouche passed away on February 12th of this year. And we are in an international mobilization to realize his life's work and many of the projects that he contributed to, which is very much informs a lot of what we see going on right now in the world with the direction that China's taking on the Belt and Road Initiative. Many people may know about this. The direction that's going on right now with the cooperation around great projects that's happening in Africa, in Italy, and other parts of the world. So I don't want to steal the thunder here, because I know this is what these guys are going to go through, but I wanted to just point out to you that everyone should make sure to take a number of these with you, because what we want to do, just to let you know quickly as an action plan here, and you'll hear more about why this is important in a second, is on the president's climate panel, which he has called for a number of scientists led by top scientist and professor at the Princeton University, Dr. William Happer, to lead up his climate panel to really get to the bottom of why the changes in climate are not a cause of man-made global warming, and that human beings are not the cause of what's happening with the change in climate, but more so that there should be a public debate, that this shouldn't just be something that people are told you have to accept it with no debate whatsoever. So we're asking a couple of things. People to write letters to the editor, people to host meetings, discussions with us, and for you to really call on your friends and neighbors to say this is a fundamental question of actually realizing that we need a science debate in this country right now, and people like Ocasio-Cortez and all the others who are pushing this zero growth policy and insanity, they have to be exposed as frauds. So with that, I think you have a sense of we're serious, we're doing a lot of work, and we need your participation. So please make sure you sign in with us. We'll talk to you about how you can get more involved afterwards, after you hear the discussion. So with that, I'm going to introduce, which one of you? I'm going to introduce Megan. Megan is here. She actually flew in. She and I have done some meetings, science meetings this week. She flew in from Virginia. She's a part of our science team, what we call the basement team, and part of our national executive committee with myself with the LaRouche movement. So she's going to tell you about what we've been up to and some of the work that she's doing.
Yep.
Thanks,
if I
Megan.
speak from here, can you all see and hear me? I'll try to. Okay, I just have some slides I want to be able to. Okay, we're good. So I just want to start by saying that Lyndon LaRouche repeatedly insisted that there's no such thing as current events. There's no such thing as, a news headline causing another news headline and so forth. You can leave the lights on, John. I think it's okay. But what there is there are processes of history that are unfolding, dynamics within human civilization that are unfolding, which cast shadows that we might see as events or news headlines. And an example of what I mean is the fight throughout most of human history between the ideology of empire and oligarchy versus the ideology of the Renaissance, the nation state, the republic, right? The idea that man is an animal that should be controlled and enslaved versus the belief that man is not an animal and that government and the organization of society should reflect that. Those are the kinds of things under the surface that drive the actions that we might perceive as some event that flashes across your TV or internet news feed. Yeah.
If you want, I can run that for you.
I could try that. I'm kind of not sure the order of my slides, but we'll go with it.
Okay.
It's probably easier if I do it from here.
Yeah.
I don't have a seat though, but so I just want to put that on the table as I go through some of the latest developments, and then also go more into what Keisha was bringing up with this fight around to crush this green policy. So over the past few weeks, you can go to the slides now. Is that tab up there at the top, the second tab? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Probably just do it.
Yeah.
So I want to go through a couple of the most important developments that we've seen, which are a reflection of this unfolding process and fight that we're in right now. And the first is that you see here, you can go to view at the top, the menu view, left, down, yep. View,
I'm not seeing.
There.
Oh,
There.
okay, one more.
Yep.
There we go.
Present.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So you see here President of China Xi Jinping and his wife arriving on Thursday evening in Italy. And President Xi arrived there with a delegation of 500 people from China, which is quite significant to be met by an equal or maybe probably larger Italian delegation. And the purpose of his visit was an official state visit on economic policy and economic cooperation between Italy and China. Actually today, I believe, was the major event, which was the signing of the memorandum of understanding between China and Italy, that Italy will participate in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Now, this is incredibly significant because people may or may not know the Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched officially by Xi Jinping in 2013. Mm-hmm. So it's in its 6th year now, is the biggest infrastructure building undertaking in human history. And what China has done, not as a single world power, but as a nation offering cooperation and agreements with other sovereign nations, is to help to develop, help to build, and facilitate the building of large-scale infrastructure projects and other kinds of economic projects, especially in countries that have been denied this for decades. For example, China has helped to make happen the building of a number of roads, but also a high-speed railroad in Kenya, from Nairobi out to the coast at Mombasa. Completely transformed this region of Kenya. They're cooperating, this is important, with Chinese companies and Italian companies are working together to finally build the Trans-Aqua project in the north center of Africa, to finally find a way to bring water to this completely dry part of the continent of Africa. Completely will transform the economic and agricultural potential. So Italy wants to participate in this. They don't want to be part of the collapsing European Union dynamic. And so this memorandum was signed today. The meeting also included the signing of 29 new economic agreements between Chinese and Italian companies, one of which, very importantly, is the provision to provide credit from China via Italian banks for companies that want to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is huge. Italy is not a little bystanding country. Italy is a member of the G7. Italy is a member of the European Union, as you all know. And actually, you can go to one more slide. So this is just another, back one. This is another picture of Xi Jinping meeting with Prime Minister Conte on the bottom here, and you can see the big honor guard that received them in the background, and the Italian President Mattarella. Actually, you should go 2 slides forward. Yeah, so this is Italian President Mattarella said this, just to give you a flavor of it. He said, the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding on collaboration between Italy and China in the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative is a sign of the attention by the Italian government towards such an initiative. The ideal framework for an increase of joint collaboration among Italian and Chinese companies to stimulate the interest of major Chinese entrepreneurial realities in making productive investments in Italy and implement concrete forms of openings of the Chinese market in favor of Italian operators. Right? So this is an incredibly optimistic development. Now you would think that if people were rational, this would be received with great open arms, but in fact it was received with a complete freak out by the EU bureaucracy, and including people like President Macron, or we call him Micron of France, who said this is a terrible thing, Italy is violating the European Union agreements, and, right? Or Angela Merkel, who said, well, it's not so bad, but I wish we'd done it together. But there's a real freak out and attack on Italy for this move. So I bring that up because it's actually an optimistic thing. I mean, the anger and the freak out and the hysteria around this shows what a weak position these imperial geopolitical forces are in. Now, the next development I just want to mention is that, I believe it was yesterday, President Trump tweeted that he would be reversing the sanctions that his own Treasury Department placed on North Korea because they had violated something or other, supposedly. Some kind of shipping something. But Trump tweeted out almost immediately, no, I'm reversing these sanctions. And it's rumored and very likely true that he said, I'm going to take the helm, I'm going to take the reins in the negotiations between myself and Chairman Kim. Right? So again, you take this situation like the kind of trigger point, right? One of the pins of the grenade that the British Empire set up following World War II in these kind of points of explosion around the globe, the North Korea situation, you take that and you see President Trump moving in to say, no, we're going to disarm this, we're going to create peace, we're going to take away this kind of trigger point for war, right? And undermine that. So that's another significant development that's occurring and is also one of the reasons why he's hated so much by the empire. And then the third and very sort of overarching development is that the coup attempt against President Trump is completely disintegrating. Keisha, I think you mentioned this, or Brian, you were mentioning this earlier. People, I'm sure, saw that the Mueller report was finally released and delivered to the Attorney General. And we put out an email this morning from the LaRouche PAC just making the point that, now this is the point to move. These guys have nothing. And in fact, it's very, very likely that now that this report has been delivered with no more indictments, that now the people, the traitors that were in the intelligence agencies and the Department of Justice, like Bruce Orr, like Lisa Page, right? All these people can now be put in front of grand juries. Now we can have some real prosecutions of the real criminals. So this is very likely. You also had the the documents that were unsealed by the judge in Florida, which revealed that John McCain's lieutenant, Kramer, was the contact point for Christopher Steele, the British intelligence agent who created this trumped up, no pun intended, dossier that's been used as the whole basis of the Russiagate investigation. That John McCain's lieutenant was the one who was peddling it to the news media, and that he was the point of contact. And then you also have a very explosive expose that was published in The Hill by the journalist John Solomon, who goes through the fact of exactly what we've been saying all along, that this coup against the president goes back to the British, and it goes back to the British traitor forces that were in the Obama administration, in the State Department and the intelligence agencies. And let me explain. What he goes through is that the Prosecutor General of Ukraine has just opened an investigation not into Russian undermining of the U.S. election, but into Ukrainian interference into the U.S. election in the form of Christopher Steele and others working with traitors inside Ukraine to release documents on Paul Manafort.
British interference,
Yes. Christopher Steele, this is British intelligence interference, right? This is completely connected into the Nazi coup in Ukraine that was supported by our intelligence agencies under President Obama. It includes the current ambassador to Ukraine from the United States, who is part and parcel to that, and who told the embassy, the U.S. embassy in Kiev, not to listen to President Trump because he would probably be impeached, right? So this is an entire British intelligence directed traitor nexus that's being exposed right now. So this whole thing is ready to blow. It is on its last legs. Now's the time to move forward. Now's the time to get out there and organize, to fight. And the way we do that is not by, we have to expose the truth. We have to expose these kinds of facts, but we also have to give people a vision of the future. We have to give people a sense of what we could fight for, the kind of sense that Italy has right now of their own future. So, passing out water. So,
You want to say your check? Did you say this one?
I can't remember. Oh yes, please. This is an important tweet, or retweet, I guess, from President Trump last week, where he retweeted something from William Craddock, who said, "Russiagate was designed in part to help the UK counter Russian influence by baiting the United States into taking a hard line against them. Leaves us all with a more dangerous world as a consequence. Just another episode of the Great Game." So now you have President Trump again coming out to point out this is British, right? That's the source of this. We're going to get back to the source of what Britain's been up to over the past century. And that really gets to, what when we talk about the currently collapsing paradigm, what are we really talking about? Well, the most primary characteristic feature of this collapsing paradigm is this no-growth, anti-human, anti-progress culture that's been imposed on the United States. It's been imposed on Western Europe most particularly. You've all experienced, this is the green agenda. It's the line that human beings are a terrible cancer on the earth, that human activity by definition is unnatural, and harmful to the earth, and the less we have of it, the better. It's the idea that there are limited resources, and that the faster we use them up, the more we contribute to destruction of the planet, destruction of poor people, they say. So this line that, this really nasty line that human beings are just another animal and are probably the worst animal, right, which is being fed to our children in schools. Think about what effect has this had on us, on the population over so many decades, right? With that kind of insidious line, which is promoted everywhere. It's promoted in schools. It's promoted everywhere, right? Go paper free, save the planet, right? but think about the effect of that over so many generations, especially on a population which, for example, industrialized to put a man on the moon. Right? What's the effect of something like that, or a population a person that worked in a machine shop their entire life, which is part of the arsenal of democracy, this industrial powerhouse that the United States once was, right? To have this now become the popular culture, the accepted popular culture. So what I want to say a few things about is, where did this come from? Where did this green movement come from? Because it is not a natural outgrowth of a population that, like I said, put a man on the moon and defeated fascism. It's not a natural thing to then say, well, all this was terrible. Human beings must be the most evil thing on the planet. So this was imposed, and I'm not going to go through some long detailed history. We've published so much on it. We have presentations you can watch with a lot of the details. But the environmentalist movement, the green movement, is not a grassroots movement. This did not organically pop up from concerned citizens or something of this nature. Yes, so the environmentalist movement was launched from, you might have guessed it, Great Britain. And it was launched following World War II. And this is important. During World War II, Franklin Roosevelt met with Winston Churchill at Casablanca. And he told Winston Churchill in a late night meeting, we're not fighting this war to preserve your empire. After the war, we're going to end the special economic agreements. We're going to give these countries, these colonies, their freedom. We're going to help them develop. Now, Winston Churchill almost had an aneurysm at that point. But the issue was, at the end of World War II, Franklin Roosevelt had died. And so what Roosevelt's vision was, which is that these nations would be developed with the most modern technologies. He offered for students from third or developing countries to come to the U.S. to study and then go back and build their own countries. This didn't happen. And the British moved in to reimpose the colonial systems. I mean, very quick example, Roosevelt had made a kind of informal agreement with Chiang Kai-shek that the British would not come back into Hong Kong after the war. Guess what the first thing that happened was? After Roosevelt was dead and the war ended, the British came right back in. So part of the way that they imposed the kind of population control and policy over these nations was through the ecology movement, through the conservation movement. For example, Julian Huxley, who at one time was the head of the British Eugenics Society, said the following.
And the head of UNESCO, right?
Yes, he was the head of UNESCO, yes. Julian Huxley traveled to Africa in 1960, and when he came back, he said, these newly independent African nations cannot be trusted with the protection of natural spaces and endangered species. Therefore, we must have an international body which can take stewardship of these lands. Okay? So Huxley was one of the co-founders of the World Wildlife Fund. Two of his other co-founders with illustrious backgrounds were Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who had been a card-carrying Nazi until he was forced to give that up because it looked bad, and Prince Philip, who is unfortunately still alive, who said on many occasions that if in the event he were reincarnated, he would like to come back as a deadly virus so that he could contribute something to solving overpopulation. So these are the founders of the environmentalist movement. It also includes funding mechanisms such as the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rockefeller Global Fund, which funded the Club of Rome, which funded the World Conferences on Population in the 1970s, which brought together the most nasty of the nasties to hypothesize and brainstorm on how to get nations to adopt policies that would lower their own populations. Actually, I think you can go there. I have a slide with the Club of Rome. So the Club of Rome was founded in 1968. It published a tract in 1972 called Limits to Growth, which is a very completely incompetent presentation of computer models based on the idea that resources are limited and that no matter what human beings do, pollution will always go up. And they make it. So they said a little bit later in 1991, and this should ring true for you given what we've experienced with this Green New Deal and the push for this greening policy. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. But in designating them as the enemy, we fall into the trap of mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. So this is the Club of Rome. They're still active. The Rockefeller Foundation, which funded the Club of Rome, is also funding, for example, the Green New Deal. They're funding the student groups that you're told are organic grassroots student groups that are bussed into Washington, D.C. to protest. Okay? So just quickly, again, not to go through all the history, but in the 1970s, we were suddenly told, well, human activity is changing the climate on Earth, and this will cause a cataclysm which will end all of human civilization. And do you guys know what that climate change was? It was global cooling. Okay? The human industry was putting up so much stuff into the atmosphere that we were changing the reflectivity of the Earth's surface. It was going to cool down. Agriculture was going to collapse, and we're going to starve ourselves, and this is going to happen within a couple of decades. Okay? When it became clear that that wasn't actually happening, the line switched to global warming, which was chosen as to be much more efficient, an efficient way to try to arm wrestle and strangle and force nations into signing binding agreements. And this was the key. This is the colonial policy. In 1988, the IPCC was founded, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was founded with the intention of getting nations to sign binding agreements to limit their CO2 output, which is a proxy for industrial development, and to instead go with what are pretty disgustingly called appropriate technologies. Right now, what is actually an appropriate technology for somebody living in a nation in Africa? A nuclear power plant, high-speed rail, a space program, that's appropriate. But what they mean is a solar panel on their roof, a treadle-powered water pump, right, something like that. So the IPCC was founded, and it's, as you might imagine, nations don't want to commit suicide. It has not been as successful in getting countries to sign binding agreements, including the United States, who, as you all know, was pulled out of the Paris Accord by President Trump in, I think, his first year in office, I believe. So this is all, and I'm not going to read this quote, but this is from Henry Kissinger talking about how it's in our national security interest to suppress the birth rate and the growth of other countries so that we can control their resources instead of them. But this is all a fraud. And that's why, getting back to what Keisha brought up, to this panel that President Trump has all but announced that he's going to create on climate change, is the so-called science behind it is a fraud. And I'm sure you all have heard, well, 97% of scientists now agree that human beings are causing global warming and we need immediate action, right? Consensus. Well, first of all, that 97% is a completely fabricated statistic. But secondly, since when was consensus truth? Since when, was the fact that X number of people all agree on something, since when did that make it true? I'm sure you all know that at a certain point, most people agreed, actually most scientists agreed, that the Earth was flat. And it was at the center of everything. Right? But they weren't right. That's not true. and in fact, it's the nature of scientific discovery that the minority is right. A single individual mind makes a new discovery, which everybody will disagree with until they come to see the truth of it. So, now that's what, you can go to the next slide. Oh yes, so we are, actually go one more, I'll go two more, I'll come back to this. Yeah, so just quickly, just to say something very brief, just one example of how they're faking the science. Did anybody see Al Gore's cinematographic debut and what's his movie called? An Inconvenient Truth. Did anybody see that?
Inconvenient Lie.
So he makes a big deal of the hockey stick curve, okay? So this is the hockey stick curve from Al Gore's movie, and same thing down here. And this is supposedly temperature, the average global temperature over time. And you see it starts around the year 1000 and goes to the year 2000. And what Al Gore and the person who created this hockey stick named Michael Mann claim is that the average global temperature was relatively flat for 1,000 years until suddenly, with the Industrial Revolution, it started rising at an exponential rate. Okay, that's the claim. If that's true, kind of alarming. However, it's not true. And it actually was exposed when a whole series of emails were leaked, which came from a grouping of scientists based at the Climate Institute at East Anglia University in the UK, but they completely faked the data. They completely manipulated the data until they could make it look like this. And what you see on the left of each of these, this is if you just plot the raw data of temperature, global temperature over the same time period, this is what you get. This is what you get. You see that the average global temperature today is actually much lower than it was during the Middle Ages. Right, and the same thing is shown down here. And what the emails exposed is what they did is they just completely dropped the data from this medieval warm period. Just completely left it out and made a few other more minor adjustments to get the kind of alarming evidence that would be required to make people panic, to instill a certain fear into people, to get them to go along with a completely suicidal, irrational policy. And then, okay, so you can go back. I just want to show you what we're doing. One of the things we're doing is we're having a lot of fun on the campuses. And this is a photo from one of our deployment sites in New York City, at a city campus there. And you see we have two tables set up, two organizing tables. And one says the world needs fewer people, and it quotes from the proffings of the Lemmings pack, like Thomas Malthus and Barack Obama, who told people in South Africa that they can't have cars and air conditioners or else the world will boil over. So we set that table up, and then we set up a table right next to it. The world needs more people. Right? The Green New Deal is suicide. Begin the fusion age. And we've just had a lot of fun fighting with each other across our tables, and having students come up to both tables to argue. Right? Students will march up to the world needs fewer people table and say, "This is crazy. What are you guys thinking? We don't need fewer people." But what we've been able to do is, using humor, we've been able to get some of these young people and other people who walk by to begin to reflect on their own thinking, which is exactly what all these tactics are designed not to do. And to get people to think through the implications of their beliefs that we should depopulate. Like, okay, should we start with Africa? How should we do it? Should we completely deny them electricity? Right? And actually get them to think through the real implications of what they're doing, but then we actually show them, well, hey, here's a policy for how we can develop. Do you know about the Belt and Road Initiative? Do you know about what LaRouche proposed decades ago with the Eurasian Land Bridge and the New Silk Road and the global land bridge, and how we could actually rapidly bring the standard of living up for everybody? So we've been having a lot of fun with these kind of deployments. Here's another picture. This is, I think, at NYU over there. Yeah, so I guess, that's basically what I want to say before I want to turn it over to Brian, but just again, to reiterate what I said at the beginning, these are not events. This is not a single issue. it's climate change or, and the Mueller report, go back. The Mueller report, these are not,
Right here?
yeah, that's good. These are not single isolated, right, issues or something like that. This is a whole historical dynamic, and we're really at a moment where we can change the whole paradigm. I mean, the whole rotten anti-development, anti-human paradigm, and then bigger than that, the whole paradigm of oligarchy that's plagued mankind forever. We can actually end this, and we're at the kind of historic moment to do that. So before I turn it over to Brian real quick, I just want to show you, this is a photo of the planet when you have a species, the kind of beautiful picture you see here with this kind of lush, just flip up, let's just flip up the light just for 1 second so you can see it better. This lush, green, vibrant, developing, growing planet. This is only possible with the action of a species which is industrialized, which is applying the most modern technologies to alter the planet. Does anybody know what planet this is?
Jupiter?
Go ahead. Flip ahead. This is Mars.
No.
This is
I
what
thought
we,
it was Earth.
yeah. This is Mars. I mean, obviously this isn't a current photo, but this is the current photo.
That looks more like it.
And this is one conception of, or visualization, I think is better to say. If we intentionally cause some global warming on Mars and create an atmosphere and start terraforming it, this is the kind of effect that the greening of Mars is something that can only happen if we do it. Right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who's going to talk about Linda LaRouche and how Linda LaRouche's policy is going to help us make this happen.
Okay.
I'll
Can
turn
you,
back over to you.
Megan, can you help?
Sure.
Yeah.
There's the other slide series. I'll leave these here. You can.
There we go.
Okay, yeah, you can go to the first slide, just to pick up where Megan left off.
Okay.
Got it captioned? What does that mean?
Yeah. Over about that.
Got it, okay. Oh, go back. Okay, I'm gonna turn this off, just so people can see the slides better. If it's too dark in here, let me know. Okay, so that was Al Gore back in 2009, right? North Pole will be ice-free by the summer of 2013. I think we're past that date, right? Because of man-made global warming. And there's Al Gore today at the North Pole. Okay, so go on to the next. And by the way, I don't know if you're aware of it, but NASA came out with some tremendous photography, but also data that they gathered on the globe that shows the Earth greening, that the Earth has been in the process of greening, that there's been a significant, do you remember the percentage? Anyway, it's a 5-10% increase in global greening over the recent decades in places like China and India and elsewhere, which is hardly a sign of a dying planet. But today is March 23rd, which is the anniversary. It's the 36th anniversary of the announcement, go to the next slide, of the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was the result of the work of these three men. Lyndon LaRouche on the far left, who originated the concept of a beam weapons defense system, not out of thin air, but based on the work of multiple scientists here and abroad, including in the Soviet Union at that time, that were moving ahead on this. President Reagan, at that time, the picture of LaRouche with Reagan is during the campaign in 1980. And then to Reagan's right in the second photo, you may recall this figure, Dr. Edward Teller, the great scientist. These were the three people that actually originated what was put forward 36 years ago today in a television address. The next picture, announcing what President Reagan named the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was a great initiative to revive U.S. science, to revive U.S. science, and a science driver similar to John F. Kennedy's moonshot program. If you remember from the history books, or you remember as a child otherwise, the excitement in the nation, the increase in students into mathematics, engineering, science, the upgrading of the whole educational system, the national defense loan system to pay for kids to go to college in science fields, and the moonshot itself. The SDI was not simply beam weapons defense, it was develop a new generation of technologies centered around lasers, which were then just being developed. Today, we're pretty familiar with them just day to day. Construction workers use them, all kinds of people. School people use them as pointers in shows like this. But powerful lasers, plasma, a fourth state of matter, so-called, a new dimension of our physical universe that we were just beginning to explore. These are some of the things that were being developed that a beam weapons defense system would require, and would require the best from our scientific and production workforce. Go on to the next. And that's just a schematic, a simple cartoonish schematic of how beam weapons systems would work. Reagan's proposal on this was to give, and this was LaRouche's proposal, original proposal, was the idea, and LaRouche acted as a back channel officially for the National Security Council in the Reagan administration in the discussions with the Russians on this, was that what President Reagan was proposing was that we jointly share this technology with the Russians, and implicitly others, so that all sides could develop this defensive capacity that would make nuclear weapons deliverable by ICBMs and so forth obsolete. In other words, using lasers mirrored off of satellites and so forth, identified by tracking by radar and from satellite radar and so forth, you could identify missiles on launch, and you could take them out with lasers on launch, in the early stages, right? So ICBMs are suddenly obsolete. As Reagan put it, better a shield than a sword. And I think Edward Teller used that as a title for his book, one of his books. Go on to the next slide. This was 1977. This was a pamphlet prepared by LaRouche and LaRouche's science team, the science behind the Soviets' beam weapon system. This was about how the Russians were already developing this. Let's get on with it ourselves, but then, of course, then the idea of collaboration. Move on to the next. And think of what President Trump is about. I want to mention this in regard to what Megan was presenting earlier, too. President Trump wants to cooperate with China. He wants to cooperate with Russia. Remember what Russiagate was about. Russiagate was about divide and conquer. It's about playing the U.S. and Russia off against each other. China and the U.S. off against each other. That's the content of the British Great Game, what they call the Great Game. Always divide and rule. So here we are talking about President Reagan and his initiative. This is very much something to kind of bring forward today in terms of our thinking. This was our book we published. We were, at that time, we were the experts on beam weapons defense. When Reagan announced the SDI, the first people to appear on TV, national TV, NBC, and so on and so forth, were people from the Fusion Energy Foundation, our science foundation at the time. And we published this book in 1983 on the beam weapons defense system. Go on to the next. And LaRouche published in this context, in this environment, his textbook on physical economy, on how a science driver drives the growth and development of creativity, and therefore the growth and development of the economy. Because what is the economy about? But it's about people. It's not about money. And we can come back to that.
And just to plug, all of these books are available for purchase and are very important reads. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Now, sashaying into the space program, because again, this is something President Trump is pushing forward today. The financing is not there yet. that's not become clear how that's going to be done. We know how it could be done, but it's not clear in terms of how this is going to get worked out. But President Trump is again initiating a push to get the United States back to the moon by 2028, and he's pushing to get some kind of combination of launch vehicle and landing vehicle and so forth put together, and NASA is scrambling to try to figure out how to do that on a wing and a prayer. If you think about the budget of the space program today, there was someone presented the other day, right? I've seen it myself. A diagram of the funding. It goes like this: the funding for the space program is like that, and then it goes skyrocketing way up during the Kennedy moonshot period. And then by 1970, it's plunged, and then it beeps along the bottom here. Was it Dwyer, the guy at? Mark Dwyer, who heads up the program here in Houston. Johnson Space Center said, and our job today is to fit this new project to get to the moon under this line, under this level of funding, which is not going to work. We got to change the way we're thinking in terms of get out of the rut in which we've been trapped. This zero growth deindustrialization that we've been subject to now for decades. Now, in 1968, this is 1986. President Reagan was at that point preparing a Moon-Mars project for the United States. There had been a science commission led by Payne, former director of the NASA program, that had come up with a plan, an overall plan for a U.S. Moon-Mars program. This is still in the context of the SDI initiative. Reagan was broadening this out. And LaRouche was proposing that the real context for the SDI to be advanced was to put it in the context of a broader Moon-Mars mission over the next 40 years. Not something you're going to do at the drop of a hat, but you plan out, you initiate, and he emphasized bringing together leading industrialists, leading companies, and so forth as part of this to begin the structuring of this kind of project, led by scientists and others, under the leadership of NASA, but involving companies across the United States. And so then LaRouche, looking at Payne's report, realized that the funding, not just a question of the funding, but the science that was involved in the Payne report was not sufficient. The primary reason being that the distance between the Earth and Mars is a lot farther than the distance from the Earth to the Moon. And you could not subject the human body to 9 months of travel or 6 months travel through through space, interplanetary space, subject to cosmic radiation and so forth. You're going to end up with a puddle for people on the other end.
End up like Gore.
End up like Gore. So LaRouche proposed an expanded program of development, still a 40-year perspective, and that's what was presented in our science magazine, Fusion. Let's go. You can go on to that. That's a model of an artist's rendition of a city on Mars, planned to the specifications that LaRouche developed. The center of the city would be of a science city, would be astronomy, education. If you note, the top of this is semi-transparent, and you have clouds. This is a little hard to see, but these are clouds inside this, right? You're creating a human atmosphere, a livable atmosphere, and then around that you build your industrial processes and so on and so forth. Fusion energy, the next leap beyond nuclear, would be required to provide the power, the thrust, to get man to the moon at 1g acceleration, with which man could get to Mars within a matter of days, within a week or two. Fusion also would then provide the energy flux density, the deliverable power that would be needed to transform the resources found on Mars, that we know are on Mars, into usable form for the people that were populating these science cities. So this was, and lasers, powerful lasers, and so forth. These are the kind of machine tools that you would need to wield in building such cities. Go on to the next. And he was very much inspired in this by Kraft Erika, the German-American scientist who was a singular figure, along with the better-known Norbert von Braun, in the development of the U.S. space program from the very beginning. But this was Erika's view, as stated here, of why the moon exists. He also referred to it to the seventh continent. And he was very well known. This is from Life magazine. This is a picture of him at a younger age in his work related to NASA and the space program. And that's a drawing, one of his drawings of a city on the moon as he foresaw it, with the atmosphere, ice skating there. This is a holiday scene, Christmas scene on a city as he designed it for the moon. Think about it. I mean, these were the kinds of things people were excited about. There were specials made. Erika was involved in these. Von Braun was involved in these. Von Braun produced a series of shows for Walt Disney that aired on TV and otherwise, including on a space station. That's another story. Anyway, go on to the next. And this was, and cooperation was the essence of what our perspective was then. This is, as Megan was talking about it today, in terms of what China and Italy are doing together, this was very much the perspective. This was John F. Kennedy in October of 1963, shortly before his assassination, speaking to the United Nations. It was his last speech before the United Nations. And recall, this is only months after the Cuban Missile Crisis. He proposes, and you can look it up, the longer speech, it's more fulsome and powerful, but this is just a brief excerpt, that given the capacities of the United States and what was then the Soviet Union, there is room for a new cooperation, for further joint efforts. I include among these the possibility of a joint expedition to the moon. We hadn't been to the moon yet. He was proposing a joint expedition to the moon, that the mission that we were already working on become a joint mission. Move on to the next. Thank you. And this is what Lyndon LaRouche went to prison for, because he wouldn't sell out these ideas. He proceeded with the initiative of the Moon-Mars program. He proceeded with the ideas of reviving the American system of economics. And it's why we've singled out that President Trump's exoneration of LaRouche would be an extremely important step to take today, not just to right wrongs, but to clear away the apparatus that's has been targeting President Trump over these last 2 years in particular. Noteworthy is that the prosecutor, the original prosecutor, federal prosecutor assigned to the LaRouche case in Boston, Massachusetts, was Mueller. John Mueller was the original prosecutor. In that case, the case was thrown out by the judge for prosecutorial misconduct. So we wrote the book on John Mueller and special reports on Mueller that have circulated nationally to the Congress, to congressional committees, and has been part of the very central to the fight to defend President Trump, based on experience, School of Hard Knocks experience. Move on to the next. So now we have another Sputnik shock. the kind of shock that was used to motivate the United States to mobilize, like for Pearl Harbor, but under peacetime conditions by President Kennedy. We have the Chang'e 4 mission that's landed on the backside of the moon. And there'll be Chang'e 5 and there'll be Chang'e 6. 5 goes up before the end of this year. And so forth. They're also building they're going to be launching a space station, building a space station in stages very soon as well. They're seeking cooperation. The Chang'e 4 mission involved Denmark, Germany, and other countries as cooperating partners in the building of the rover, the U-2 rover, and other components of the project. No one has done this before, landing on the backside of the moon, which is extraordinarily important for science, and we can come back to that as useful. But we also have another shock. We had the announcement in February of last year, of 2018, by President Putin in Russia of their development of 6 new weapon systems, which they were deploying at that time, as President Putin announced, which involved new physical principles, involved nuclear-powered rockets. We were working on nuclear-powered rockets under the NERVA program at the time that the NASA program was shut down after President Kennedy's death. The hypersonic glide systems, that is over Mach 5, maneuverable, which we haven't mastered, how to maneuver hypersonic vehicles, and so on and so forth. A new laser defense system, which they're deploying. We still don't know a lot about that, but we do know that these systems are being deployed. The Kunzal hypersonic missile, that's already deployed in Russia's east. That's just, a matter of fact, that's known. This was a shock because, moving on to the next slide, well, that's a schematic on hypersonic gliders. Just move on to the next. The science of hypersonic flight, this is our science magazine, again, back from 1986, has been known for decades. That's not to say it's been mastered, but the science that had to be mastered, the capability of hypersonic flight was known. And we were committed to pursuing it. And this would have been one of the consequences of the kind of program that LaRouche, Reagan, and Teller were advocating, a science driver, which means, basically continued acceleration in science. It's not a program where you go for one targeted result, like, oh, we're going to the moon and returning and then we're shutting everything down. It's that you build on top of each scientific breakthrough as you go. You open up and you reset new horizons and you move on. As Reagan was doing, okay, I've announced the SDI, okay, that was 1983. Now I'm going to launch a Moon-Mars shot, a Moon-Mars mission, right, in 1986. This was where Reagan was going. Challenger exploded in the middle of that, thanks in part to the FBI. Not that they did it themselves, but they helped create the conditions where that happened. And Reagan did not launch the Moon-Mars project in '86. Move on to the next. But on the other hand, what Putin is proposing, what Russia's already proposed to the United States for over a decade, is that we can, in fact, turn hypersonic technology, nuclear rockets, a net of space-based radar systems and so forth, to a whole other purpose, to defend planet Earth from asteroids, right? We know we are going to be visited by these folks again and again and again, and we're going to get some large ones, and we know that in the past they've been associated with things like the extinction of the dinosaurs. I wouldn't say they caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, but they certainly were a factor. You want to talk about global cooling. If one of these things hit the Earth, a large object, the size of a tank, a modern tank, say, you might get a real global cooling effect as a result of what you stir up. But this is the kind of thing that Russia strategic in converting a strategic defense initiative, which you still need today. You still need, the world needs a strategic defense initiative capability shared among nations, but to also develop it into a strategic defense of Earth. And that would be a joint project. You know, for example, if you're going to defend the United States from asteroids, it really doesn't help you to build a, kind of way up there in the sky somewhere, a defensive system over the United States. You know, asteroids are going to come in and the Earth rotates and so forth. So, I mean, the point is you can't build an asteroid defense over your own pea patch. You've got to build it for the whole Earth, or you don't build it at all. So it has to be a global cooperative effort. This has been proposed from the Russian side. There's been initiatives from the U.S. side that discuss this in the past, including under the George H.W. Bush administration at one point. So this could be taken up today. In other words, we don't have to, as Pompeo and some of these other neocons are promoting, we don't have to get into an arms race now with Russia. The point is, what Putin's put forward is essentially a defensive system. They're saying, if you keep moving your troops closer to our border, NATO and so on and so forth, if you keep moving, Aegis ships and on land Aegis capabilities, Patriot missile capabilities, up to our borders, and so on and so forth. This is the capabilities we're going to have to be able to deliver a second strike, a return strike. We're going to be able to respond. We're going to maintain mutually assured destruction. All right, well, the point of Ronald Reagan's initiative, really the intent of President Kennedy, if you think about it, in his UN speech, is, hold on a second, mutually assured destruction is not the way to guarantee mankind's future. I mean, that's a very, global, the idea of global warming and we're going to, mankind's going to wipe itself out with global warming, that's one insane monster story. But to have an environment where you have mutually assured destruction, where your survival is based on your capability to kill me before I kill you, or knowing that you know and I know that if one of us shoots, the other will shoot at the same time and we'll kill each other. I mean, what kind of world is that, right? Why not convert this all into mutually assured survival? Better a shield than a sword. So we really are at that point. And again, this goes to the heart of Trump's efforts, dating back to the Clinton administration, to enter into negotiations with Russia as well as China. And that's the perspective of LaRouche in terms of a 50 years perspective for mankind going forward. Move on to the next. Now, I want to just end here with a few short slides. Megan referenced, our still existing capabilities and the potential of our youth. And I want you to visit a laboratory with it. It's really not a lab, it's a manufacturing facility. It's a training facility. And go on to the next. I want you, anybody have an idea where this is? This is in Stafford, Texas. This is the Houston Community College Manufacturing Center of Excellence. Go on to the next slide. That's their logo. This is inside the manufacturing training facility itself. This is the manual machine tools on one end of this enormous facility. And one of the professors that runs this facility is there. Go on to the next slide. This is a set of CNC machine tool platforms, tables set up here for operation. They train in programming, they train in prototype production, they train for the oil and gas industry. We have one of the largest machine tool capabilities in the nation, indeed in the world, right here in the greater Houston area. The whole oil and chemicals industry requires tremendous production of valves, not only metal alloy, but plastics and so forth. So this is the this is Mr. Gifford. He's the head of the Fab Lab, fabrications facility. Anyone can walk in the door of this facility with a plan for a prototype, and these guys will help make it real. The door is open. You don't have to be a student. You don't have to be, you don't have to have a logo. You don't have to be from a company. You can walk in the door. And he's got 2 or 3 assistants that are just top notch. You'll notice here's the space shuttle. You can't quite see it here, but this is a scramjet and other models from NASA. He's a real NASA bug on top of it. This is the connection between science and converting science into the real world, into machinery, into parts. There's, what was it, the Atlas was, anyway, 10 million parts, or whatever. Saturn was something like 10 million parts that had to work, right? Move on to the next. This is a part of the Fab Lab there, all kinds of machinery, equipment, basic cutting tools, but also the next one, this is one of their CNC units, numerically controlled machine tools. So, they're training young men and women today in these technologies, including additive manufacturing, what some people call 3D. But I think that kind of waters it down, and people think you're talking about building little things out of plastic. This is metal, and this was made from the bottom up as one unit. This is not assembled. This is one piece. It was created as one piece. A kind of carburetor unit, I assume. But it was there on display. Just an example, this is about roughly 5 or 6 inches by 6 inches by 6 inches. Just again, this is a small size, but you can build pieces, that are 20, 40 feet long. Depending on the machines that you have, the capabilities of the machines, and we're going to have to do this kind of thing on the moon. We're going to have to do it elsewhere, but we're already doing. This is additive manufacturing is already producing parts of aircraft engines and so forth. As single units, as opposed to being multiple pieces that have to be welded together and so forth, which obviously, have inherent weaknesses because they're welded and so on. They're producing parts now that combine those, multiple pieces and produce instead a single unit. So this is an example of what can be done. And NASA's up on the space station, we're doing additive manufacturing experiments there. China's doing them as well elsewhere otherwise, going into, taking up planes and rockets up into virtual zero gravity and doing experiments with doing additive manufacturing at zero or near zero gravity. So this is the kind of thing, this is what we have to do. This is part of what we can do, and it's right here, at our fingertips, as part of creating a new economy. So that would be what we really have the capability of now, if you think about it. The Mueller report's out. I mean, I haven't read it. Nobody's read it yet except for Attorney General Carr. I'm sure he's poring over it. Yeah. But there's no new indictments. Right? That's been said so far. We don't know what else is in there. It's probably loaded with landmines. But the point is, it's already an indictment of the whole process over the last 2 years. What the American people have been submitted to in terms of this Russia Gate operation. This has just been horrendous. It's been horrendous on the American people. We can lift this cloud once and for all. We should move on, but not just move on. There's a bunch of people that should be lined up, and indicted and should have their day in court. From the other side, shall we say. But beyond that, we've got to move on as a nation. And that's definitely what I think President Trump has in mind, and we have to inform him. We have to advance conceptions and ideas into the discussion process in the country now. We've got to fill the vacuum. with real ideas and real science. So I'll conclude there, and
Open for discussion.
Keisha and Megan and I are certainly open to answer questions. And just for discussion, the President's Commission on Climate Security, that's what Megan and Keisha referred to, has been drafted. Some of the drafts have leaked. That's how we know about it. The Greenies are going nutso over this, that the president dares to challenge the consensus, like the Russia-gate consensus, to create his own commission, to have a public presentations and debate of the science on what's involved with the climate. Be taking this in the form of editorials, letters to the editorial, encouraging editorials, taking it, getting on talk shows on this, a multitude of ways this can be brought forward. We also encourage everyone to call the White House and urge President Trump to now move forward with the commission, officially announce the commission and move forward with it. We don't know if all the commission members have been named, but Dr. William Happer, as Megan I think mentioned, anyways, it's written up in the Hamiltonian. Has been named, and that again would also be a great help, in help our fellow Americans, to get a grip again on where we are and how we move forward. So, thank you for your kind attention. Mm-hmm. Questions, comments, testimony?
So while you guys are thinking about your questions and comments, I'm just going to point out a few things here. Because I'm sure you have some questions.
I'm going to sit down now.
Yeah, go for it. First of all, we publish a weekly magazine publication, which actually comes out online. What we do is encourage people, if you want to print them out, we print some out, but the Executive Intelligence Review on what's going on, our role globally, internationally. The latest developments is this is President Trump meeting with that's Tremonti
Conte, or Prime Minister Conte.
Prime Minister Conte, yeah. But this is around the Italy proposal for joining the New Silk Road that Megan brought up earlier. There's what we're doing on many reports on what we've been doing on stopping the coup against the president. And on that, I just want to say too, we've put out an email today, and I want to encourage everybody who's in here we're at a moment right now where, as you've just seen, everything is breaking wide open. The operation that's been run on the American people for the past over 2 years now, that has bombarded our lives out of control, continuous perpetual lies, is now coming to an end. And what Brian brought up and what we've made very clear here is that this didn't just start all of a sudden in 2016 or with President Trump. This has been an ongoing operation and a coup against the republic of our nation, against our Constitution, against the people. And the number one fighter that has stood strong against this enemy apparatus has been economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche. And we have built a movement based on these ideas that you've just heard. And the key right now, and I just want to reiterate this, that if you want to see justice served in this country and in the world, we have to actually bring justice to the man and to his ideas. And I hope for those of you who are new, you've gotten a real sense of the powerful ideas of Lyndon LaRouche, his work with Reagan. And this is not about parties, as you could see. The ideas of John F. Kennedy were not democratic ideas. He might have had a D behind his name, but he was a president for all people. As if we've seen the collaboration with Reagan,
what he was trying to do, his vice president, I'm sorry if you believe that that guy was a good guy, but H.W. Bush was not a good guy, and and he did not represent the better interest of the Republic of a Nation. He might have had an R behind his name, but the Bushes don't share the same idea about the Republic and doing good that President Trump right now has. They wanted to get us into nuclear war. So I want to say that I want to encourage you to get behind our fight for the full exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, because that means putting an end to this coup and putting an end to the imperial policies of the British Empire, that they won't be able to run another operation on the American people like this again, because this means true justice. This means putting an end to this coup for good, and you should read more about that. We have a petition online. It's going out internationally. It's being circulated, and as we said, this is what we want President Trump to take up. There's also in the new Hamiltonian that you have a report, an editorial on the role of Mr. LaRouche and the fact that this man is really, truly respected and inspired internationally. He's inspired so many different people. You can read about the condolence letters that have come from leading political, cultural leaders around the world, and get a sense that if you really want to see this type of future be brought about for the good of mankind, for economic progress, for cooperation, we need you in our fight, and we need you to get involved. And so I want you to take some material with you. I'm also asking that everyone leave your contribute to our organization. If you're not a subscriber to our Executive Intelligence Review, please become a subscriber. Please make possible our work on the streets when we send our young people out to the campuses. Nobody else is doing this, because let me tell you, we've been on meetings this past week with top scientists, including NASA astronauts and engineers, people who worked. This year is the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing, Apollo 11, which completely changed many people's lives. I mean, Megan and I weren't born yet, but
You would think about.
Brian, but we were definitely being thought about for our role in the future. The future was being designed for us to fight right now, because we've been very active in our fight for the call for saving the space program. I, as a political candidate, and this is what Brian just went through right now, should have been very optimistic about the future that we need to create. The problem is we could have already been there if it hadn't been for a coup process that's been run on the country, if it hadn't been for the near assassination of President Reagan himself and operations being brought in there, operations in our space program. So I hope you got a sense that we are serious. This isn't just a fly-by-night, cheering for the president. We're out to lead. We want the president to actually take up the right policies and to back him up around being presented what the solutions are and what needs to be done. So with that, give me your questions. Give Brian, give Megan your questions, thoughts, comments, and encourage you again before you leave. Back us up, contribute to the fight, and we're going to keep getting some good things done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where are we in Congress? Where are we? We're out here doing things, pushing and sending letters and reports. Where are we on the inside?
We're in Congress too. Yeah, we have teams, so we have an office in the DC area. We have offices up and down the East Coast, so we have been getting the most important material into Congress, like the Mueller report. We've saturated the Congress with that.
With our Mueller report, not
Our,
Mueller.
yes, not Mueller's report, our report on Robert Mueller. Yes, thank you. Barbara Boyd is kind of covering this coup operation and writing articles that you might see on our websites. We've been getting that in, meeting with people on the intelligence community committees and so forth. So we've been in there meeting with these people. I mean, a lot of the problem is people have this real cynicism about Washington, and it's warranted. It's warranted. However, the Congress is only as good as the population makes them. We have to scare the crap out of them into doing the right thing. So, I'm bringing that up because we're there. We're making sure that the ideas are in there, that they know what's going on, but they're only going to be forced to move when the population leads them at this point.
But who in Congress is on our team?
I wouldn't count anybody as solidly on our team.
Yeah.
In the sense that, well, anyway, just straightforwardly, before I forget, I just mentioned Evelyn, my wife, the other day went through the Texas congressional delegation. It's something like 25%. Do you remember what the figure is?
Mm-hmm.
Something 25% of the congressmen now are new. They're brand new. They just came in with this last election. So we have a lot of fresh faces to work with, and we should recognize that as potential. But you saw this with the exception of a handful of people. I mean, that I know of that we work with, at least like with the House Intelligence Committee, we work with Nunes's people, in terms of the Mueller material and helping them in terms of developing the lines of investigation and so forth. We had a great friend who just passed away, Congressman Walter Jones from North Carolina, who worked with us on declassifying the 9/11 report and materials and so forth, and on Glass-Steagall and other measures. He's passed away. There's a number of other congressmen that we meet with that pick our brains, that in that sense are listening to us, but they're scared. They're scared because of the prosecution of LaRouche.
Yeah.
The FBI, look at what they know. What at least those that are sentient knows that, that have a sense that what's being done to Trump, what was done to LaRouche, they don't want to put themselves in the target box. Again, like Keisha said, unless we make them measure up. So I think, while it's a fair question to ask, well, who's on our side? I think it really is just good, honest, and refreshing to say, don't count on any of them at this point. We've got to make them good.
Well, what I was getting at is like the new Congress lady that's pushing.
Mm-hmm.
AOC or occasional Cortex, the one that's pushing the Green New Deal.
Right.
Yeah.
But she's there where everyone's going to listen. That's the point. We're still, all these people may be helping me agree, but we're still on the outside. And she's there on the inside pushing an agenda.
She's there with the British.
Right and wrong.
She's there with the enemy.
We were talking about it last night with the astronauts and the scientists from NASA and so forth. Our little roundtable get together. Look, these guys are it's really fragile. Ocasio-Cortez doesn't know anything more than what she's pump primed to say. She's somebody that's come up in this politically correct school, and just repeats what she's learned, and she obviously believes in she's narcissistic as all get out, and so she believes what she says as soon as she says it. But in terms of the political environment on both the Republican and Democratic sides, it's completely fragile. Look at the revolt. Trump, of course, despite everything that's been thrown at Trump, he keeps fighting. And the American people support him. Even these stupid polls show it. But then you look around the world, the yellow vests in France, the election results in Austria, the election results the other day in the Netherlands, the new Italian government. Not that all of these political parties and all of these individuals know exactly where they're going or what the solutions are, but this is a revolt against neoliberalism, against the whole straitjacket that people have been put under over the last 2 generations. And so it's completely open. And I think that's what we should really have a sense of, is that we're now on the offensive. President Trump is cheering us on, among others. But more importantly, we should motivate ourselves. Benjamin Franklin said, "You have a republic if you can keep it, ma'am." Well, do we? That's, we have to really look in the mirror and decide, and then get out the door. And we're willing to collaborate, and we've got an office right in Houston, and we're available, and Mark Rhodes is right here in Conroe, and so we can collaborate, and we can do a lot.
Mm-hmm. Just to
Go ahead, Matt.
just to add one point, which is also think about this from a standpoint that's important. What Megan started with the Italian situation, because the first thing I know we Texans or Americans tend to do is to say, well, that's nice, but what does that have to do with me? But it's important for us to think outside of the box and look at the shifts that are going on globally, because President Trump understands them very well, that the shift in the United States is not going to be made by one-to-one interaction with getting some Congress members to do something. But the reason Trump got elected in the first place, and this is what LaRouche understood, is because there was a global shift that was going on. At that time, in 2016, you had the Brexit going on in Europe, you had the developments around the Belt and Road Initiative, so forth. There has been a shift that's happening in the world. And it's plain, like we are at a point right now that these Congress members who are pushing this genocide agenda, they're not going to be able to win unless the American people just throw in the towel. And right now, the American people are not willing to throw in the towel. They might not exactly know what to do, but trust me, they're fighting. And we see it every day on the grounds. We see it, with our discussions with young people right now. And as long as we don't give up, we organize our neighbors, organize our friends, we get a mass movement in the population, because that's what it's going to take. A mass movement around ideas, around solutions, not just people, going out there and holding up their pom-poms. So I just wanted to add that, because it's already happening right now. Look, the system is at a point where it's about to blow. You see what's going on with this stuff in France and other places, the yellow jackets. People are saying, you're not going to kill us. We don't want austerity policies. We don't want economic collapse. We don't want a Green New Deal that's going to, destroy us and destroy our industries. And especially people should be outraged by this when you have children being manipulated and brainwashed into believing, not just believing this stuff, but when the children are being told, you have no future, just give up on life.
Or Pied Piper being brought into the Congress to...
Nigeria.
Oh yeah, or
Yeah,
the young
yeah.
people being brought into the Congress and saying if you don't do something about this fact that the world's going to end in 12 years, and that you're
destroying our
future. You're destroying. I mean, this is such a blatant lie and piece of crap but this is what we're doing to the kids. Instead of saying, hey, this is the future, space development, where you can become a genius, that we should be telling these kids about. So that's your responsibility. It might seem like it's a hard task and we're a long ways away from it, but I don't think we are. I think we can be optimistic that victory is like right here at our fingertips if we do the right thing.
Well, I know you tried politically, and I just feel that if we had someone on the inside, if we had more clout.
Well, we have the president of the United States.
Well, the president, no,
He's
I'm
on
not
the
sure how much
inside.
clout he's having, every time we turn something's wrong. He's just a tweet away from doing the right thing.
We better get more of those out. Other thoughts, questions? Well, if not, you guys can just talk, ask
I
the
guess
questions.
we can invite him to the concert in Houston, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes, ooh, that makes some of those, I had some.
Did they have some fun?
Yeah, they were sitting on top of the stack, but I don't know if they,
No,
anyway.
we have among other things, we promote classical music, great classical, beautiful music. And we have a chorus, and we perform all over the Houston area. And we're going to be presenting a concert at the Riverside United Methodist Church on May 5th. That's a Sunday afternoon, 4 o'clock, May 5th. We'll be presenting Mozart's Solemn Vespers, contrary to what you might think. Solemn originally meant festive. I know that's a hard leap to make, but it's not a solemn Vespers. It's a festive Vespers, but a full piece, and we'll have strings and keyboard and so forth as well. And we'll be performing a selection of African American spirituals and other pieces as well, and it's free. And so that's what Joel reminded us of.
And
You're all
most
invited.
of your emails here, we will send you
And bring your children and your
reminder
school.
about that,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's the nation needs beauty, and that's beautiful music. Thank you. Okay, and everybody did give me your name and numbers, okay, good.
Thank you all for
Thank you
coming.
very
Yeah.
much.
All right.
Nice meeting you. I'm sure we will see you again. I've got to be able to do something more with Facebook.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
We're going there?
Good.